Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. It's nice to see some old friends who have joined us and some new colleagues as well. This is Paul Hesselschwartz. I'm the president of Global Partners Training. I'm here with my colleague and partner, Fab Battaglia. I'm based in Cambridge, Mass, and Fab is based in Milan. And we're going to talk with you this morning about a transformation that we've seen going on in the technology industries and in different industries, electronics and healthcare, in life sciences, software, and many, many others. And we want to share with you our experiences and specifically how our clients have capitalized on this transformation to drive their business growth. Before we get started with that, just a couple of housekeeping details. Our presentation will go for about 30 minutes, after which we'll give you a chance to ask questions. And at any time, of course, during the presentation part, you have the opportunity, of course, to type a message or a question in the chat box, and we'll be happy to take that and answer all of your questions at the very end. I want to remind people also that when you signed up, we sent you a PDF of what we call a reminder card, and that if you have that handy, it may be a good time to be able to use it. We'll get to that a bit later in the webinar. And lastly, a recording of this webinar and the slides that go with it will be sent to you after the session itself. So with that as the background, let's get started. Okay? All right. So I mentioned a minute ago that the business transformation that we see companies going through is about unleashing the untapped potential revenue that's available to companies who leverage their service organization. Now we've had this is the second in a three-part webinar series. And in the first webinar in the series, we highlighted that there are three barriers to unleashing those revenue opportunities, namely moving from a reactive way of thinking and behaving to being proactive. And by being proactive, you can establish the impression with your customer that you're a trusted business partner, not simply a good supplier. And that's really what opens the door to more revenue opportunities. So now in this second barrier, which is about getting below the waterline that we'll talk about in a minute, moving from technical issues to getting to the customer's real issues, this is the subject for today. And it's fundamental for establishing the trust that you need to have with your customers in order to get them to open up and to reveal what their real issues are. And of course, addressing those non-technical, usually hidden issues are the ones that very often lead to those new revenue opportunities. Now, doing this effectively, of course, is very much a skill as well as it is an art. And it can be learned, but it requires practice. And we're actually going to give you the opportunity in this webinar to learn two of the basic concepts and to practice them. Now, the third barrier, reaching balanced outcomes, will be the subject of our next webinar in the series. So let's get started. Let me show the agenda for the next 20, 30 minutes or so. So we're going to start by showing you a tool for engaging with customers in a way that helps you to go beyond just the surface issues that you might typically hear and address with your customers. We'll give you some typical issues that are below the surface for your customers, and we'll show you how to surface them, and then most importantly, how to address them. And we'll show you another customer dialogue tool that does that. And of course, we'll leave time at the end of the webinar for your questions. Now, to get us started, Fab is going to talk about food. And of course, we all know that Italians are experts in cooking. So Fab, you want to talk to food?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul, for this transition. Yes, we're going to talk about food, and I have a question for you, a very rhetoric question. What is the difference between this omelette and that omelette? What do you think? Is the difference between a basic one, a superior one, a juicy, an attractive one, and maybe a boring one. What is the difference? Well, the difference, you're gonna say, of course, it's visible, is in the ingredients, but not only in the ingredients. It is also in the cook and how the cook is going to put the ingredient one after the other, how he's gonna mix the egg, how he's gonna make the omelette fluffy and juicy, so you really have a magic experience when you eat it. Now, guess what? That skills, that ingredients are very easy to compare to the relationship and when you make the difference between a basic relationship and a superior, special relationship. A relationship that is without color, without depth, boring, and a relationship that is exciting, where people are happy to get together, when the customer is really thrilled that you call him or you are organizing this meeting with them. Now, if you're the supplier, you're in customer service typically, what are the skills and the ingredients that you need to inject into the relationship for making it like you can see it on the right of your screen compared to the one that is happening maybe for uh, most of your colleagues on the left of the screen? So what will make you really thrive above the rest in terms of relationship? And this is what we're going to look at in this webinar, looking at the second shift of the global approach, which we call a customer-focused approach. That is all about digging below the waterline. And for that, I'm going to leave the floor to Paul, who's going to explain the concept of the iceberg.
Yeah, so you might be struggling a little bit to think about the connection between omelets and icebergs, but here's the thing. So most of us know that most of an iceberg, in fact, probably 90% or more, is actually below the waterline. It's not visible, and it's an important metaphor for us, an important model for us, because relationships can be very much the same way. Now, over time, you can build strong relationships. You can dive deep below the waterline and identify the other person's issues, whether they're business issues or personal issues. But you need to get to know people to really be able to do that. And at first, of course, relationships can be more superficial, and they mainly stay above the waterline or almost transactional in some cases. Now, this is especially true in business if you're in the type of business where you're frequently interacting with different people. You know, in IT help desks or in a lot of service organizations, you're really dealing with different people fairly often. So you need to find a way that you can establish that trust and get below the waterline quickly. You need to be able to connect. So, and you know, some people may be very good at this. Some people are just naturally empathetic. But for a lot of people, especially highly technical people, you need to learn your way there, which is precisely what we're going to do now. So let's start by taking a look at some examples of what are above the waterline issues and below the waterline issues. So in general, customers will almost always phrase their request in above the waterline language, and they're pretty easy to spot. So these are the issues that customers will tell you about directly, and they fall into four general categories. So those are quality. They'll tell you they're unhappy with the quality. They'll tell you that they're unhappy with the technical performance. They'll complain or try to negotiate around the money, and lastly, they'll talk about time. And there's no hidden agenda usually here. They'll tell you those are the technical issues. But sometimes these issues are genuine. They'll just tell you that we don't have enough money, or they'll tell you that your performance is not what was stated in the contract, whatever. But sometimes the customer's body language or their tone of voice gives you a hint, an indication that there's something else going on. We call it something else going on below the waterline. So imagine, for example, that the customer complains that your system is not performing as it should. Okay, that's what they tell you. Now, it may be true, but you may also suspect that the real problem is that the people operating the system don't have the necessary skills to do it efficiently. Or your customer himself may believe that the real problem is that the system needs a major upgrade, but he knows his management is never going to improve the investment. So here's the thing. If you address only the above the waterline issue as the customer explained it, you won't solve the above the waterline issue, and you certainly aren't going to solve the below the waterline issue. On the other hand, if you do get below the waterline to the issue about the staff not having the necessary skills, or the person themselves, the customer himself, not having the confidence that he can get the investment for an upgrade. If you don't get to those issues, if you do get to those issues rather, you'll not only solve the above and the below the waterline issues, but you'll generate new revenue opportunities, either through the sale of a system upgrade or through additional training or both. And you do all this not by selling anything, but by solving the customer's real issues, which, when you think about it, is what really effective salespeople and service people are doing all the time. So the key thing here is to keep in mind that people have many different below the waterline issues. If you look at the size of the below the waterline mass for an iceberg, it's really the same with issues. There are far more below the waterline based on the situation, the person's personality, their mood at that moment can generate different below the waterline issues. Now, your challenge then is to identify what those issues might be, whether they're business issues, whether they're professional issues for the person, or even deeper, whether they're really deep issues. Okay. So we want to give you some examples of what those are, and we want to get you started on how to identify those. So to do that, Fab's going to give you an idea of the power of using this iceberg tool with our first poll.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. Let's look at the first question. The first question is very simple, okay? Imagine the customer has a small budget and says, genuinely, this is too expensive for us. Is this above or below the waterline? So you should have the poll on the screen. You should be able to answer. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. We have 40% of people answering, 50, 50 plus, 60, 70, 80 something. And we get everybody, almost everybody. All right, let me show you what is the answer. What are the answers? Show the answer. Good, wonderful, great. Okay, so this is interesting. Of course, the right answer is, in this case, is above the waterline. So most of you have answered correctly, because we say it has a small budget and it genuinely says this is too expensive. So we can assume there's not much to dig. I mean, it's like, well, they just don't have enough money. So of course, there is a little bit of assumption here that they are honest and transparent. But if this is the case, there's no hidden reason for them to lie to us. And when they say it's too expensive, it's just too expensive. So this is a typical above the waterline issue. But that was the easy question, okay? That is the easy question, just to make sure that we are clear on the concept. We're gonna get a little bit more difficult. Are you ready for the second one? I'm gonna show you the second one. All right, launch the poll. All right, so The customer says, I need to have an update on the repair progress every hour. Now, my question to you is, how can you go below the waterline? And you have three choices. You can say difficult, as we may spend more time reporting than repairing. You may say, we will try, but please rely on us to do the right things. Or you may say, I understand you're very worried about how the repair goes. Remember, your objective, your mission is how can you go below the waterline. All right, we have 30 people that have answered, 50, 55, 57, 70, or 70 all of a sudden. Great. 89, we're getting there. Brilliant. Very good. Very good. So let me show you the results. All right. Brilliant. Brilliant answering. Brilliant answering. Okay, so none of you pushed back. Okay, so you're right. The first one was definitely an answer that will close the discussion right away. Second one is more polite, but it will also close the discussion to some extent. Okay, the only one that is opening the door to a deeper discussion is the third one. I understand you're very worried about how the repair goes. What you will notice, and we'll talk about this later, you will notice this is an acknowledgement. So through the fact that the customer says, I need to have an upgrade on the repair progress every hour, you're sensing there is something going on. So when you acknowledge, I understand you're very worried about the repair, how the repair goes, you are actually prompting the customer and showing empathy somehow, which of course, if you have the right technique, which will show you later, open the door to further discussion. Brilliant, brilliant. Now, let's go a little bit more difficult. Okay, let me show you the last one. Now, a question for you. Which of the following is deepest below the waterline? Well, when we say deepest, we want you to understand the most difficult to surface. Which of the following is deepest below the waterline? The customer has a fear of losing control. The customer does not want to share some confidential IP. The customer receives too much pressure from his management. Go ahead. All right. Okay. 80% have answered. Wonderful. A few more answer. Yes. Great job. Great job. So let me close the poll. Maybe someone is still thinking, huh? Okay, let me close the poll. Goes. Show the results. Oh, interesting. This is interesting. So which of the two, so nobody said the customer does not want to share some confidential IP. Nobody voted for that, and that is correct. Okay, this is probably the easiest thing. A customer will easily tell you, well, this is confidential. So this is just below the surface, not far. Now, 1 and 3 are interesting because usually what we say is that everything that is in the field of fears is a bit more difficult to surface than interpersonal work relationship. But again, there's no right and wrong, and this is the human relationship. So definitely 1 and 2 are more difficult to surface. Probably 1 is going to be difficult to get someone to admit he has a fear of losing control. That's something that we'll do. Okay, great. So now when you look at this, this is the iceberg. Okay, so you understand there's a lot of things below the waterline, but The question remains, how do you get there? What are the tools? What are the keys? What are the skills that will make the great omelette? Okay, so let's go back to Paul and the tools that will help you there.
Good.
Paul, to you.
Cool. This very last question was very interesting. In a way, they're related, of course. The person could have a fear of losing control, which is then exacerbated by the stress that he's feeling from his management team. And so the thing about understanding what the below the waterline issues are is that this is more art probably than science, because there are so many issues there. And so what you need is a tool, which we'll talk about now, which will help you to basically make a statement, an empathetic statement to the customer that's based on what you think might be going on below the waterline, which then validates that issue or leads to a different issue, and then be able to use that to establish trust and empathy with the other person, and then create this open dialogue, which is really going to be able to get you to pull out of the other person all of the issues, which you can then address. And once you've addressed them, you've really solved the customer's problems, both above and below the waterline. So the model that we found to be really effective is an active listening model. And it's the acronym for it is ASQ, which stands for 3 stages in the model, which are attend and acknowledge, the one we'll talk about now, solicit and observe, and question and confirm. So attend and acknowledge is that initial response that you have from the customer. When the customer tells you, in our example, that they need an update every hour or so. In that situation, what you've got to do is a couple of things. One is you've got to assume what you think the below the waterline issues could be. You then need to generate or create some rapport and empathy with the other person. And you need to do this by what you say in those first few seconds. Okay? So once you've done that, then that's going to open up the rest of the dialogue that's really going to help you. So let's take a look at what are those special ingredients, as we've been talking about, for attend and acknowledge. The first one, attend, is all about being present. And what it really starts with is self-awareness. So it's not only paying attention, I think that's obvious, but it's really being aware of your own attitude. Now, attitude drives behavior. And if your attitude in this conversation is this customer is unreasonably demanding, he's a control freak, and whatever, invariably that's going to find its way through into your own body language, the tone of voice that you use, even the words that you use to respond to the customer. So be very, very aware of your attitude at the moment that you're responding to the customer. The second thing, again, around self-awareness is to be aware and avoid any behavior, any of your own behavior that could make the customer feel that you're not really listening. And we all have these habits of body language and tone of voice and, not paying attention, not making and maintaining eye contact, checking our cell phones perhaps, using automatic phrases that are not only not meaningful, like, as I said before, but can come across as a bit hostile in some cases. So you need to be aware of that. And if you're aware of that, the chances that you'll be able to manage it in the conversation, of course, go up dramatically. So that's the first part. Acknowledge, though, is probably the more essential part once you've done that. And acknowledge means say something, not ask a question yet, but actually say something. And there are 3 ways to do that. Now, the first way to do it is to simply repeat what the person said. So you can say something like, I know that we promised that we would do this, and we didn't do it. So it just demonstrates really that you clearly get it, that you understand exactly what the person said. But you don't want to stop there. What you might want to do in the second stage is to describe what the other person is thinking and feeling. So you kind of describe their emotional state, and you can say things. I can see how frustrated you are. I can see how upset you are. I can imagine this is a very frustrating situation for you. But the third part then is you really need to dive below the waterline. You need to look at their specific concerns. So let me give you an example of how that works. Let's take the situation where the man on the left is presenting a report to the woman on the right. Okay, and she's been following the explanation closely, and at the end she says, "Interesting," but in her voice you can hear that there's some hesitancy. So the man recognizes that the way the woman has said "interesting" is probably, she's still probably pretty puzzled by the explanation. Now he has a couple of choices at this point. He can just keep going, or, if he really wants to find out what the meaning of that was, what's her below the waterline issue, he needs to acknowledge her. And how does he do it? He does it first maybe by repeating what she said. He could say, I can appreciate that you say this is interesting, and then describing her possible hidden feeling. I have the feeling that maybe you're a bit puzzled by the report. And then dive below the waterline, saying something like, maybe you're wondering how this links to our previous conversation. And by doing that, it kind of gives the other person the opportunity to follow up. And the idea is, by doing this, that she's more likely to say, well, yeah, now that you mention it, this really doesn't sound like what we talked about in our discussion the other day, and frankly, I'm still puzzled about what's going on. Now imagine if he didn't do that. She may have insisted eventually anyway, but there's also a good likelihood that she would just go away from the conversation feeling puzzled, and somewhere down the line, that's going to come back to haunt the guy. Okay? So now, instead, it leads to a soliciting question that the man can ask, which is, so what are the areas that you'd like to discuss further? So with this as an example, what we'd like to do in our next poll is to give you a chance to practice with some scenarios. So let's take a look at a couple of examples and see how you would handle it using this kind of an acknowledge approach. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. So now it's your turn. We are close to the end of the webinar, but before, we want to really give you a chance to practice that. So imagine you are in front of these three customers, okay? Three customers, and let me give you a little bit of context. The woman on the left, she just been handled a big project in a very short notice, and you ask her, how is this going? And she says, with this body language, I'm fine. The man in the middle is an IT engineer, and you're on an IT project, which is pretty complex, and he's telling you, well, this should work. When you ask him, how do you think about this project? He said, well, this should work, but look at the body language. And the third one, you're working on a very important project for a given company, one of your customers, and this project manager asks you, how confident are you? Now, my question to you is, how are you going to acknowledge these three reactions? And here are the questions for you. So launch the poll and you answering. So the woman on the left, remember the woman with arm crossed that says, I am fine. What are you telling her? I can tell how upset you are. I would also be upset. Or, I'm happy you're feeling fine about this. Or, you're saying you're fine, but you don't seem fine. Okay, so you have 1 minute. Okay, 20% voted, 50% voted, 55, 57, 60, 70, 80% voted, 89. Great job. Okay, great job. Let me share the results. Good. Okay, so nobody, of course, answered the question number 2, which is, of course, missing the point. And you're hesitating between the first and third questions. Now, it's interesting. The first question is typically a describe way of acknowledging. Yeah? I can tell you're upset. I would also be upset. The third one is a repeat kind of acknowledgement. You're saying you're fine, but you don't seem fine, which include a little bit of description. The more you describe, the deeper you go below the waterline. So I think you classified perfectly. Both questions are good. The first one is probably better than the third one. Both are good, so congratulations. Now let's go to the second person, the IT engineer that is touching the back of his neck. Sorry, I'm putting back the same. All right. Now, man touching the back of his neck saying this should work. What do you say? Do you say, I assume you like what you see? Do you say, you don't look 100% confident this can address the issue? Or do you say, you look a bit worried by the complexity of the solution? Okay. So we have already 40% that answered. Wow, you guys are getting faster and faster. 79, 70, 80, 89%. Wonderful. Okay, let's close the poll. Let's share the results. All right, guys, you got it right. So, of course, nobody answered the first one, which is missing the point. Lovely. You don't look 100% confident. This is a description, so it's an acknowledgement. Point two, a description. And the third one is a dive. Okay, so yes, probably the most powerful is the dive. Now, remember always with the dive is that you are guessing the acknowledgement a little bit. So you're taking a risk. You need to have a context, because if you hit it, then you are directly talking about what lies below the waterline, and you are right on spot. But if you are not, you may seed another problem in the mind of the customer. So the dive is powerful, but like everything it is powerful, it's also a little bit dangerous. Let's go to the last person. Okay. The man sitting and asking you, how confident are you? You're answering, I'm very confident. I handled many projects like this. Or, I feel like you're not so sure about my level of confidence. Or, I feel confident, but maybe I'm missing something. Am I? Okay, 33% have voted, 44, 56, 70, 70. Who says more? We are missing a few votes. 89, great. Close the poll, share the results. Wonderful. Okay, so where are my results? Hide the result. Share the results. Okay. All right. Okay, it's a good point, because that one is difficult. Okay, many people could have taken number one, because the question is direct. How confident are you? And if you feel like is a problem, you may answer, I'm very confident. So very good. You guys avoided number one, and you hesitated between number two and number three with a big majority on number three. I feel confident, maybe I'm missing something. Am I? And of course, then the question is back actually to the customer who is prompted or solicited to dig below the waterline. The second one is not bad, but maybe some of you feel like this is a little bit aggressive, okay? I'm a bit judgmental. All right, so number two and number three is probably number three the better. Very good job. Excellent. So you're getting this. Brilliant. So now, the beautiful thing here is that this directly link, these three are customers. So that directly links to revenue opportunity generation, as Paul is going to illustrate now.
So I wanted to point out how these situations, and by the way, these are real situations that our clients and others deal with and apply some of these tools. And of course, there are lots of other things that go into the mix to generating revenue. But if you think about, for example, the the woman who's just been handed this assignment and is telling you in this very insincere response that she's fine with it, by acknowledging her appropriately, it demonstrates that you're sincerely interested in being their partner and then helping them to solve the problems. And where does that lead? Well, it means that down the road, when you're in a situation with a project like the one that she may be managing, and you end up having to increase the scope because of necessary changes in order for it to work, that the trust and the empathy is going to be there. So she's thinking about you as a trusted partner. And that goes a long way towards generating additional revenue when changes need to be made for projects. That in the case of the skeptical guy who's wondering whether or not this is really going to work, similar type of thing. When you get into a situation, if it doesn't work, then it's much more likely that he's going to stop the project and maybe cancel it altogether, but certainly going to pause the project because he was never really convinced that it was going to work in the first place. So this isn't so much generating a new revenue opportunity, but it's ensuring that the revenue that you have in place is going to continue. And with the last one, if you can understand more precisely what you need to do to establish the customer's confidence in you and then do it, then the likelihood that it's going to lead to more work is high, because now you've proven that you do have the competence and you do deserve this confidence, and then that's just going to lead to more revenue. So you can see that by getting to these below the waterline issues, what you're doing is you're establishing that trust, that relationship, that reputation as a trusted business partner. And that, in our experience and the experience of our clients and others, really opens up the door for other revenue opportunities. And then selling and maintaining the deals that you do have in place just goes so much more easily. So we could talk more about that at some other point, but I wanted to take a few minutes at least to see if you have some questions. Before we do that, I just want to point out a couple of things. One is that we've converted each one of these situations into a script, and we'll include that script in the slides that we send you later on. So we're not going to go through it now, but you'll have the availability to use the script going forward as a good example to practice. Okay, so with that, I want to just remind people that our third and final webinar will be coming up, and this is on the topic of achieving balanced outcomes, which again means how do we create that dialogue with the customer, those responses when the customers ask us for something that is not reasonable or not possible, that achieves balance for us in terms of maintaining what we need to as a company and yet still meeting the customer's needs. So, and we'll send you more information about that a bit later on. So I think we have time to answer a couple of questions. We're a bit over our time, but there may be some burning issues that people want to address before we go.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Right. So you may ask questions in the question part of your prompter. And what I see here, I see one question that could be addressed given the time left. And this is coming from one of the participants who asks, in the iceberg model, how do I get the right approach without sounding too personal? Because as you go below the waterline, you may become personal. Okay, yeah, good question. Thank you. Paul, you want to take this one?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, this comes up all the time because it's true that, you do get to a point sometimes where you're thinking, boy, I can't be asking a question like that. It's just way too personal. First of all, the personal questions, if it gets to that point, the chances are very, very likely that it's the other person that is going to open that up. So you would never ask a question like, are you are you feeling so much stress that it's starting to affect your family life, for example? But you wouldn't ask that, but it's highly likely that as you're talking to the customer about the stress, imagine you're acknowledging by saying, I can imagine the stress that you must be feeling. It's more likely that the other person is going to answer by saying, this stress is so difficult for me right now that it's affecting everything, not just my work life, but my personal life as well. And at that point, you're not, of course, going to start giving them advice, but at that point, you can simply say something like, I can imagine that, this is really getting to you in so many ways, and the stress must be extremely demanding. And then you can ask a question like, what could I do to help you in this situation? What's the most important thing that I can do for you personally? That really creates that bond. You haven't intruded or overstepped, but you're really communicating to the other person that you're willing to do anything to help them personally. So it's typically the way that comes up. It can sound like a challenging issue at the beginning, but as you get better and better at this approach, typically what you find is that you're not really called upon to start giving people all sorts of personal advice. It just doesn't come up that way. So I hope that helps. Fab, any other questions?
No, I think we are good now. I'm mindful of the time. We are 10 minutes past the timing. We said it was a micro webinar, so I want to be respectful. We may have one more question that is popping up now. How do you do this when there is an urgent issue to fix for the customer?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me jump in here. I think the mistake that people make is when there's an urgent question is trying to dive below the waterline. I mean, the issue is the urgency, and so when there's an urgent issue, then it's not even a below the waterline issue. So what you do is you address the urgency first. So when the customer is saying this is interrupting my operations, at a critical point, this has to be fixed right away, you don't start asking questions about what could be below the waterline, but instead you simply say, I can see clearly how urgent this is for you, and therefore, what would be my question would be, what is most helpful for you right now? What could we do at this moment to address the situation urgently? And then, as you're talking about it, they may say, well, the most important thing I need now is to be able to understand when the problem is going to be fixed. Okay. So it takes you into that direction. So it's the same process, but when there's an urgent issue, you just need to be careful to address the urgency first, because that is the issue.
Exactly.
Okay. Anything else?
I think we're good for the moment. We have a few more questions, but my guess is that we'll take note of that, and then we'll get back to you in due time as we follow up on this webinar. You remember, you have a document, a PDF document that you can even download from your prompter right now, and you will receive the slide deck of this webinar, and you will receive the recording of that webinar.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for your participation and for your questions, and we look forward to hearing you on the next webinar. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.